Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Lucia, and I'm a curator focused on the intersections of art and ecology. I'm very, very grateful to Beatrice, to Satomi, to Jen, and to all the colleagues at the World Around and at the Guggenheim for having us here. It's a particular pleasure for me to sit here together with two heroes of mine, Join Paino and Liam Young. Join Paino joins us here as the production designer of the HBO TV series The Last of Us, which we'll be talking about today, of course, but also countless of other exquisitely designed films and series, including The Morning Show, Sharp Objects, Big Little Lies, and many more. Liam Young works between design fiction and futures, and as a designer, director, and producer, you, Liam, create films and speculative worlds that I think raise crucial questions about the world such as it is today, and visualize possible alternative tomorrows. Your accolades, both of your accolades and achievements are really too many to mention, but why are we here, and why in the context of thinking about architecture's present and future? It was Italian anthropologist Ernesto De Martino who, deploring the disasters of empire, suggested that a world comes to an end when its signs and its logics are no longer readable. That is the end of a world, and there have been many. In the face of unfathomable devastation and the destruction of worlds vanishing under the crushing weight of climate breakdown and other forms of slow and fast violence, how do we then make sense of worlds ending and worlds beginning? How do world-making practices and world-building practices play a fundamental role in those transitionary moments of survivance? Redesigning the logics that hold the world in place such as it is, and then imagining it differently. In this context comes The Last of Us. Based on a video game of the same name, The Last of Us begins as rising global temperatures cause an adaptation of the cordyceps fungus, which becomes capable of infecting human hosts and controlling their bodies. And the events of The Last of Us take place 20 years after the mass societal collapse that ensued, and it was Join Paino's job to depict this world, a world after the end of a world, and yet a world all to itself. And by entering it, we are ourselves brought into a psychic state that is simultaneously familiar and unfathomable. So the starting point of this conversation will be The Last of Us as an artifact of our uncertain times, between worlds perhaps, but we will dive into forms of world making and world building, also guided by some of Liam Young's speculative film projects, including here, what you see here, The Last Endeavor, and that we'll speak about later. So Liam, John, thank you so much for joining us. So let's start with a question for both of you, and I will ask John first, which is, from the vantage point of your particular profession, what does world making and world building means to you?
Well, as a production designer, we start with a narrative, and we develop a foundational logic for the world. And we're making the world. With The Last of Us, we had to build a lot of sets, scenery, locations, and then destroy it. So our narrative, from what you described, that we're following to give the world its logic, and gravitas is that a disaster happened 20 years ago, and everything, nature has taken over, but also, because there are no resources or electricity or anything like that, we have to reuse, rebuild, and remake everything. And that was for world building, for making, our version of a world of our narrative. That was our foundational logic. That was our brief, so to speak. And that colored everything and affected everything. That's our layer of disuse and dissection was on top of reality. And that would color everything and affect everything. That's pretty much our brief.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times in design and architecture disciplines, we focus on the creation and crafting of singular products or discrete buildings or objects that exist isolated in space, but in such an entangled world in which we now exist, it's impossible to imagine such objects without seeing the tendrils and networks in which they're caught within. You know, there is no such thing as a singular site or point on a map anymore. And for me, world building is a discipline that allows us to think about the social, cultural, and societal systems within which the things we might design operate, right? Like, it's no longer possible to think about the iPhone as a discrete object that sits in our pocket without thinking about all of the disconnected and landscapes that exist around the world that are complicit and fundamental in the production of that object. World making as a design practice imagines all of those systems and visualizes all of those systems, and contextualizes the things that we might design in that way. And in that sense that, you know, as we craft and make imaginary worlds, they also become sites in which we can prototype important and emerging ideas around how we might rethink those systems. So like whether The Last of Us and like imagining what happens when the ecologies and the systems that we rely on collapse. You know, at the same time, imagining the implications of emerging technologies. What does a world where drones as ubiquitous as pigeons look like? Or cars are flying, or AI is everywhere. So world making can help us to explore those ideas. And really, I think we make alternative worlds as a means to understand our own world in new ways. And that's one of the powers of, you know, a show like Last of Us, is it forces us to confront what some of these futures might look like, and acting as cautionary tales, hopefully to engender new kinds of action in the present that might, you know, in the case of The Last of Us, help us to understand how we might avoid such a future.
Thank you. Here we see a school 20 years after the catastrophe school scene. But my next question, again for John, has to do with world building for a TV series, as opposed to the world building that was done for the making of the video game. There are some things that differ in your experience of it, because obviously having played and watched both The Last of Us, when you're playing it, you're making a series of choices. And then, of course, there's boundaries to that world. There's places you can't go. When you're watching a TV series, what is being in front of you is the world that you're allowed to see. But I'm curious also if there's things that, in order for the logic of the place to make sense, if there's things that you actually have to build or conceive of that are never seen in some way.
Yeah, there is the practical mechanics of making the show. Like, we're always going to be thinking, there's layers of people involved who will bring something to us, to the show, that we have to take into consideration when we're building the sets. There's the practical stunts, there's atmosphere that's created, there's rain effects, there's also the position of the camera, and all the collaborators, like the directors and the showrunners, who will add their layers of you know, what they need as far as you know, satisfying the narrative and where we're walking. And you know, I think it was really important too for our show to actually make as much as possible. We, you know, there's always, with every show, there's that balance of what should be VFX and what should be real. And it was important to our showrunner, and I think it helped the show give it its sense of gravity, gravitas, and reality, was to build as much as possible. And we didn't use it all, but I think that helps the actors. It's certainly also when the directors and the crew come to set and they're like, wow, look at this. I want to be able to explore the world, and I want to be able to be a voyeur in this world and feel disembodied occasionally with the camera movements or observing, and take it out of the path making. And so making a bigger world and giving all those pieces is something that, you know, the game does not do. It was important to everyone that this is a narrative about the relationships of the people and how they relate to the environment, certainly, but it's actually an intimate story. And I think it was a really good decision to not follow the where's my first aid kit or, you know, what's behind me too much. A little bit, but you know, those are some of the big differences.
Well, like one of the things I found interesting, one of the similarities I thought between the game design and the TV show was that traditionally in set design and production design, you're only shaping and designing the set that the camera is looking at. Like all of your blocking and framing is coordinated, and you're just making that one piece, the classic spaghetti western facade with nothing on the back, which is very different to level design in game, where you have to allow for a player's interrogation of every crevice and corner of a world. But in the show, what was extraordinarily ambitious about it was that your sets were 360 degrees, is that right?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of times they're in the mechanics of making a TV show where don't storyboard, and you want to give the actors the ability to, you know, explore and see things. And they loved it because you could, you know, I want to go over there, and you know, with the picture here, this is all built except for obviously the background. But the other thing that we take into consideration is where the sun is and things like that. So they affect, you know, those are other considerations we wouldn't have to care about in a, you know, a purely digital thing like the Mandalorian, where they're just walking through green screen. We actually are dealing with the outdoors and the elements as well.
So there's a particular corner, one of the most, moving episodes I've ever seen in a TV series, period, episode 3 of The Last of Us season 1, which is Bill's town,
Yeah,
Bill's
town.
world. And as I understand it, this allowed you to unleash your kind of creativity more because it's a space that you expanded much more compared to the game, correct?
Yeah, this was really a joy. Not only was it a beautiful episode written, and but we're outside of the game. This was never in the game. This scene, we just see Bill in kind of like an industrial area. So Craig wrote this incredible script where we have this oasis, which our show does not have. And I think it was a really smart thing as far as making the show not just a show about infected people. Here, you know, this is just our typical process of doing LiDAR, which is a radar at a location, and showing how we can build a hamlet in New England, which we could not find in Calgary. So this is what we're going to see is some process here. This is our, you know, here's a typical render that we would show the showrunners and everyone and say, here's what it's going to look like in the end, and we're going to make it exactly like this. And that is what we did. And as it degrades, we also want to show the effects of the outside world, of the, you know, desiccation that will be coming. And it's all in service of the narrative. If you've seen it, you would know what that is. And here is the finalized town on location. And this is mostly built, which it's amazing that we were able to do that. It's unusual, to say the least. And I think, again, it helped because when the directors got in here and the actors, they really used the set more than just, as Liam is saying, you have to shoot this way. But I think that, you know, gives the show the feeling of a film and a complete story. And this is just an example of it dressed. And again, you know, most shows, I think, you know, they'd probably do a lot of this in VFX, and we didn't, because we thought it was important.
Thank you. So you've sent us some beautiful images, including this, which gives us all a sort of peek into the making of something like this. What I'm really interested in, both this slide and the one that will come after, has to do with the relationship between creating a world in order to destroy it, and then working with nature so that the reclaiming of of those plant species and those kind of more than human elements are in a certain sense also repairing that world. So there's a kind of destruction and repair happening at the same time.
Well, you know, there's a destruction and repair, and this is a typical reference board showing you how much detail that goes into creating the destruction, with references for the scenics, with a little nod to plants, which, you know, we always wanted to do in our wallpaper, to the fungus, and what this set will look like. I think the repair part was, you know, just that it was the fungus was part of nature, and the fungus is restoring balance. and nature is restoring balance. So what we wanted to do was explore a little bit more like, where is the fungus in all these plants? And is it in there? And is it a natural part of evolution? And those were ideas that we bounced around, and we would one subtle thing is just in some of the wallpaper would be floral, or some of the colors would copy the mushroom, the clickers.
I mean, one of the things that I am intrigued by the phrase that you use, like you have to destroy the world in order to remake it, in a way, makes me think of also the role of the fireflies in a narrative sense in the show, right? Where, for me, my mind then goes also to contemporary eco-activist movements and Andreas Malm and how to blow up a pipeline where, after so much time of peaceful protests and collective action and hashtag activism, are we at a point where the peaceful protest is no longer valid, right? And you see the fireflies acting out against the quarantine zones and the world that's trying to be remade as a means to remake it in a new way. But similarly, I also think, like, more broadly, the work of a show like The Last of Us and the world building of these sort of apocalyptic visions act in many ways as kind of productive dystopias, right? That you have to destroy the world for us to kind of see just how reliant we are on the ecological systems upon which it's based, in order for us potentially to act and find a new way to operate within it. I equate Last of Us to Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is talked about as one of the most powerful ecological novels of the 20th century, but it doesn't talk about climate change. It doesn't talk about any specifics that we might discuss in those terms today. It just shows us a world and what it looks like and how we might act if those systems were to fail. And in that way, it does so much more than what the data visualization experts that sees this riding red line on the graph that tries to narrate this warming climate for us in those data-driven terms. It's much more about data dramatization that imbues climate change with emotion and power so that we can no longer just tune it out or ignore it. And I think The Last of Us can potentially operate in that way. So literally, to destroy the world, we might need to remake it. Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah,
and
vice versa.
Sorry, John, you had a comment. Well, actually, I want just on that note, there's something that you just prompted me to think, which is the apocalypse of The Last of Us holds three things together, because as sort of a follower of the genre of the zombie, it sort of harks back. There's a whole sort of history of kind of decolonial thought around the zombie genre, and then we look at it being a pandemic and the whole series having been shot during COVID times, obviously resonating with its real sort of material production. And on top of that, the behavior of the fungus is affected by a warming climate. So it's sort of
it's ironic.
It's a little grenade of everything that we're...
Yeah, and to your point too, I think we looked at the fireflies and the Phaedra, which is FEMA, right, as maybe two sides of the same coin here, both, unfortunately, trying to get what's left. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting about the zombie genre, if we can put Last of Us in that, I don't know, but like it was never about zombies, right? Like Romero's 1968, Night of the Living Dead is about U.S. race relations, right? Even Shaun of the Dead, right, is a contemporary take on that and like lazy consumerism. And in many ways, the monsters of Last of Us are not like the infected, the clickers running around chasing you down, but a warming climate that makes the conditions for such fungus, moving species possible.
And
right?
increasing fascism. So there's a lot of monsters in The Last of Us that aren't...
Yeah, the show is ultimately, how are we going to react in these situations, and what are we going to do to survive? How are we going to treat other people, and how low can we go, or how high will we go to survive too? Yeah.
I mean, it's a perfect point to talk about, Liam, your project, The Great Endeavor, I think, because there's an element of kind of imagining the future, collective dreaming, and sort of planetary scale infrastructure to it that I would love for you to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of my work right now is trying to use world making as a practice, as a means to visualize aspirational futures. But it comes in this context where I think at the moment a lot of the moves we might be making to try and regenerate our climate and the futures that we put up as being workable solutions we should be trying to get towards are still based in the failed and outmoded models of boomer environmentalism, right? That are rooted in local responses, individual guilt, small-scale action, and everything of the scale of the planet is the work of the Bond villain or the mega corporation. Like planetary fictions are always, in many ways, dystopian. But the scale and urgency of what's required, these small-scale actions are not scalable. So the great endeavor as a project is trying to visualize what will become humanity's largest ever construction project, which is, in our generation, the need to design a planetary scale network of carbon sequestration infrastructure equivalent to the scale of the current oil and gas industry. And if you think about that, every pipeline, every oil rig, every gas plant that currently exists on Earth, in our generation, we need to build again to do the reverse. But no one really talks about it. So there's an attempt to not, to present this ambitious and extraordinary project in the same way that we might talk about the moon landing or the digging of the Panama Canal. We have always built the impossible, and now we need to build it again. So the great endeavor is a visualization of that attempt to do so, and hopefully by putting into the world these sort of productive visions of planetary scale collaboration, maybe they become sort of, in some way, touchstones that we might start to work towards that are actually viable at the scale of 10 billion people. Yeah.
Thank you. And just in terms of your own response to The Last of Us, Liam, is, from the point of view of what this world presents itself, and of course it has echoes of things like the world without us and a bunch of other kind of environmental disaster references, is the world of The Last of Us, in perhaps both of your opinions, a world with humans, without humans, for humans, or not for humans? I mean, how does this world relate to humans in a way?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I think that it presents a world beyond humans, right?
I don't think the world cares about the humans. No, I mean, there's a new species now that's vying for, supremacy, and not in a, in a passive way, almost just like a weed, and it doesn't care. It doesn't at all. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps us in a way to think about. We use, on stages like this, in conferences like this, we talk about, human-centered design as being some kind of aspirational thing we might be working towards. But for a long time, that's really just been an alibi for engineering the world around our own needs and desires. We're fed in that context. Human-centered design is, cafes spilling out onto streets lined with trees and things like that. But actually, it's a massive terraforming project is what it has resulted in. And I'm much more interested in what it means in the context of something like The Last of Us to think about like carbon-centered design or wetland-centered design or like whooping crane-centered design. The Last of Us shows us a world where the real monsters are us, right? And it presents, an alternative to us at the center of everything.
There's also the idea that because it's posited that the Earth's warmed, the fungus has adapted to infecting things, and now it can affect people. So it is in one sense, it is a result of climate change.
And John, I just was reminded of the fact that the two towns that look the least wrecked are, on the one hand, this kind of hippie, sort of cooperative community where Tommy lives, and on the other, this like hellhole mountain place where the worst atrocities are being committed.
Yeah, it's a ghetto, it's a QZ, and this is Jackson, which is a town that, the inhabitants make an effort to make livable. But the QZ is kind of like a slash ghetto immigrant, holding center.
And you looked at those visual references, didn't you?
Yeah, no, yes. We looked at, a lot of stuff in Gaza and stuff like that, where people are held. I guess humanity at this point is feeling the effects of climate change. What's the term? The people who have to move because of climate change. And yeah, so now humanity is a refugee in its own place because of the infected and because of the lack of resources and the earth, nature taking over. So this town is, people here have skills and they're making it, livable, whereas the QZ is a ghetto, kind of like it's a, survival of the fittest, ghetto, basically, and not, the people there are just barely hanging on, and they're not given the means to build or do anything.
So I want to ask Liam you this question because there's a kind of third imagination in this project of yours, Planet City, which proposes a third human-designed kind of environment, which I would love for you to talk about. And we have just a few minutes to get to the joy question, so I want to make sure that we get to this one and the joy question.
Planet City, I was on a stage on video talking about this a couple of the world arounds ago. Short of a Last of Us scale global pandemic, we're going to have to deal with around 10 billion people in the next couple of decades. The Planet City project is a visualization of a city built at that scale, but with some of the same principles that might operate in a town like Jackson, but what do they look like at the scale of 10 billion? A city organized through consensus, right? The model of how people migrate to this imaginary city is based on the extraordinary movements like the Global Climate Strike and Global Climate March, and organizations of the largest, the biggest number of humans ever assembled before on our planet were coordinated through the network, through a hashtag, through a Facebook page. And we imagine Planet City as this multi-generational project of retreat from the world we know into this collectively organized urban form that is dense, but at the same time is vibrant and full of life and culture, because so much of science fiction, again, planetary dystopias present density as dirty and congested. But if we're really not going to go extinct, we need to imagine what it might mean to live more compactly. And Planet City is a prototype of what that might look like. Yeah.
Beautiful visualizations. Thank you so much. Now, getting to the joy part, because this is what we must end on if we're talking about a post-apocalyptic disaster TV series. The scenes that happen at the mall made me think about the fact that there must be quite a lot of enjoyment and fun also in the production design.
This was it.
And work.
Well, this, as a child of the 70s, growing up in a mall and hanging out in a mall, this was a lot of fun. This is also a place where, most of the show is, in these dreadful, desiccated places. So here, even though it's desiccated, because we have electricity, we're seeing life. We're seeing, there's so many layers to the show. One thing that's important in the show is seeing the world through Ellie's eyes. And here, she gets a glimpse of, because she grew up in the QZ, which is a ghetto, she's never been out of it. Here she gets a sense of what it was like before. And also, we're introducing colors and things because now we have electricity. These neon colors will never be seen again. They're not going to be made, and there is no electricity anywhere. So this is my chance to have some fun with the colors, bring back a hint of the world in pre-infection, and also make a great date night kind of episode here, too. And I just love that she's, looking at things and saying, so people cared about wearing underwear, what it was. And so it was, there's a great dichotomy in this show of the ugly and the beautiful try to do that in every scene. A little bit of both would be, would be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also, what I also love about this scene is that it reminds us at the same time of the excesses that led us to a condition of possibility that meant that the fungal infection would run rampant. And can you talk a little bit about that as well? In that, like, because in one way you're presenting a future and you're making decisions about what would last and what would be left behind.
Yes, I mean, I think the shoe store and the lingerie store didn't get, actually the shoe store got raided quite a bit because people would steal shoes, but not thongs, there's a theory. So there actually is a lot of thought behind all of these decisions, and this is a store from 20 years ago, too. So everything is period correct in the logos and the locations. The arcade, all the video games had to be rebuilt because that software won't work anymore, and they have old TVs in them. And so there's a lot of thought between, just getting from here is the idea and the script, and here is the set that Ellie and Joel can walk on and actually walk up to any pinball machine and play it if they want to, or walk through any store. Because also, we want that for the creatives. We want to give them the ability to explore the set. But that would be, we did have a kind of like powwow, like what would looters take? And I remember those two. Those were out of everything. Maybe not the Halloween store either. That's why it's mostly left there.
Yeah. I mean, I just also want to jump on your phrase radical optimism, like in the context of The Last of Us, but also in the context of Hollywood, where we operate, where so many narratives present like climate apocalypse as being somehow inevitable, partly because it's a great setting for a story, but I do think there is space for optimism even in the face of the most extraordinary global pandemic, right? And ultimately, like a lot of my work, Planet City, the great endeavor, is trying to get into this idea that climate change is no longer a technological problem, right? It's, for the most part, the technologies required to dig us out of the holes that we've created for ourselves are already here and have been here for 10, 15, 20 years. Climate change is now a cultural and a political problem. So making work that operates in that space, whether it's through TV shows or entertainment or an art context, I think is really where the front lines of the climate battle may well be fought, right? And that's why I think that, I don't know, I'm also filled with extraordinary optimism, because what that also means is that we're not waiting for some billionaire to figure it out for us. We could do everything we're talking about. We could change tomorrow if we wanted to. We're not going to, but we could, and that is, I think, great cause for extraordinary hope.
I am so devastated that we're out of time, but I just want to take 1 second to say, John, Liam, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.